Members of council, ladies and gentlemen, the clerk advises me that it is now 7 p.m., so I will call this council meeting to order. And I would ask you please to stand and join with me in a moment of silent reflection and our national anthem, O Canada. Mr. Clerk, are there any agenda announcements and/or amendments?
Just two minor ones, Your Worship. We have a letter on Council's desk from Zelinka Priamo Limited, dated March 1st, regarding PD 00219. Also, at the end of the meeting, Council will adjourn into closed session, Your Worship.
Thank you. That first item will be handled in committee. Councillor Cluett will be in the chair for that one to table that particular item that's on our desk this evening. Are there any disclosure by any member council this evening? No disclosures. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Ellie and second by Councillor Best, and be it resolved that consent items numbers 1 to 6 be approved. Is there any one of these that any member wished pulled out and dealt with separately? Councillor Best?
Item 5.
5. Any other item that any member wished pulled out and dealt with separately? If not, Councillor Best, number 5.
Yes, Your Worship, through to you, staff, just a request that when you are looking at the maintenance standards and planting on road right-of-ways, that staff keep in contact with Milton Hydro and the Regional Public Works Department. There are concerns regarding hydro lines and water and sewer lines as well.
That will be noted. Thank you. Anything further on 5? If not, you've heard the resolution. Those in favour of the motion? That's carried. Members of council, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the council meeting. Might have been one of the shorter ones on record, but I rather suspect, Councillor Cluett, when you assume the chair, you're probably going to be a little longer here. So give us about 2 minutes, members of council. Councillor Cluett will assume the chair, and we'll get underway with committee work in just a moment. So, council meeting is now adjourned.
Good evening, and thank you for being here and being patient as we got everything ready. The beginning of the Committee of the Whole meeting, and as His Worship mentioned, our first item of business is report number PD 00219, which is a technical report, the proposed local official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment by Jackal Holdings Limited for the property located at 130 Thompson Road South. And there's our town files there. So we have one registered delegation, and I believe we're going to be starting off with Mr. Lupus from our staff to a brief presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of council, and members of the public. I'm here to introduce staff report PD 00219, which speaks to a proposed official plan and zoning amendment applications made by Jackal Holdings for the lands located at 130 Thompson Road. The applicant is proposing to construct 3 high-rise mixed-use apartment buildings with heights of 31, 29, and 27 stories. The purpose of the amendments is to allow for an increase in height for the proposed buildings, and staff has prepared a comprehensive technical report, which you have in front of you, to address all the technical issues and public comments that were received, and we welcome any questions the public or council may have at the appropriate time. In attendance tonight, as well as the authorized agent, Terry Korziak of Korziak Urban Planning. He will be giving a brief presentation and overview of the proposal.
Mr. Korziak, welcome very much, and welcome to coming tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Clue, Mayor Krantz, members of council. It's my pleasure to be here this evening. As Chris mentioned, we're the planning consultants to Jackal Holdings, which is the name that this property is held under. It's actually part of a group of companies, goes under the name of Hodero. Your planning staff have prepared a very comprehensive technical report, probably one of the most comprehensive ones I've seen in 30 years of doing this job, which addresses the proposal in considerable detail. We've reviewed the report, and we want you to know that we agree with the analysis within the report, and that we also support the staff recommendations for approval to our applications to amend the official plan and the zoning bylaw. The presentation I'd like to do this evening will be relatively brief. I'll try to keep it under 10 minutes, and I want to cover 3 main items. Firstly, I'd like to provide an overview of the various policies out there, provincial, regional, and the ones that you have here at the town that direct the most intensive type of growth, highest density development to the areas closest to transit stations. Secondly, I'd like to provide a summary of why this location is one of the best, if not the best, locations in Milton for this type of intensification. And lastly, I'd like to provide a bit of a description of the proposal. And after that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions if there are any of council. So I'd just like to start off at the higher level provincial policy stuff. And there's really 2 sets of policies that direct how growth works in Ontario. And that'd be the provincial policy statement. And then there's also the provincial growth plan. So the policy statement is fairly general in nature, and it provides general guidance on land use planning matters. I think what's important is to understand, and I think probably most councillors are aware of this, is that decisions of council have to be consistent with those policy statements. The policy statement places a very strong emphasis on intensification and redevelopment that can make use of existing infrastructure, such as GO stations, municipal transit hubs, roads, sewers, etc., and can also take advantage of existing community facilities such as libraries, art centers, recreation centers, and parks. And as I'll cover shortly, all of these elements are at the doorstep of 130 Thompson Road. The policy statement also directs municipalities to provide a range and mix of housing types and densities, including smaller, more affordable apartment units such as those proposed in this development. The province, as I mentioned, also has a growth plan, and that gets a little bit more specific in outlining how things are supposed to be done in Ontario. Lower level governments such as regions and local municipalities must, by law, conform to the provincial growth plan. The latest version is 2017 in their official plans and in the decisions made by council. The growth plan sets out a few different parameters, one of which is a minimum of 40% of new residential development is to occur within existing built-up areas. It further identifies what are called urban growth centers and major transit station areas as locations within municipalities that must provide for compact, higher density, transit supportive development through intensification and redevelopment of existing underutilized sites, such as 130 Thompson Road. The area around the Milton GO station, including 130 Thompson, is identified as in the provincial growth plan as being within both Milton's urban growth center and Milton's major transit station area. The policy growth centers don't prescribe a maximum density for these areas, but instead sets out a minimum that needs to be achieved, which is 200 people and jobs per hectare over the entire area. The 130 Thompson proposal conforms to the direction set up by the province to intensify within strategic growth areas, such as urban growth centers and major transit station areas. It would support existing and planned transit infrastructure and contribute to achieving the overall minimum density requirement for your urban growth center. The region of Halton, as you're aware, also has an official plan which has to conform to the provincial growth plan, and it provides further direction. Again, another level of detail going beyond the growth plan of what's expected in Halton. So it has that same target of 40% of new residential development being within the built-up areas, but it gets a bit more specific because what it says is for Milton, Milton is supposed to deliver 5,300 new residential units within the built-up area by the year 2031. So it gets that much more specific. It also does the same thing and identifies the urban growth center and the major transit station area in the same fashion. The major transit station area, and I'll show you an air photo shortly, but basically the land's within approximately 500 meters of your GO station. 130 Thompson is about 200 meters away from the GO station. So it's one of the closest properties available for development to the GO station that isn't going to be occupied by Metrolinx's parking lots. The regional plan also states that 50%, at least 50% of the new housing units in Halton be in smaller units, such as in the form of townhouses or apartments. So our proposal conforms to the regional plan and those requirements in the regional plan. The region has reviewed the application and supports the approval of the applications. In their comments, the region noted that it considers intensification and development of intensification sites such as Milton's transit station area as the highest priority of urban development within the region. Next, going on to the town has endorsed a future urban structure. Council did that in 2017, and that again did the same thing. It confirmed that the urban growth center is to be the focus for intensification within the town, and that's to ensure conformity with the requirements of the provincial plan and also the regional plan. And it also, the urban structure states that, again, that makes a lot of sense because having additional units and people within that area will help support the town's goal of getting all-day two-way GO service at the Milton station. The town's official plan also has a number of policies dealing with the form of urban development in these intensification areas. It encourages mixed use. It encourages retail, restaurant types of uses at grade level, encourages the buildings to be closer to the street to help animate the street, encourages parking to be hidden, preferably in parking structures, and it also supports a reduced parking standard so that there's less of a reliance on the automobile and more use of transit. The other thing that's important for this application too is that council also endorsed tall building urban design guidelines that were prepared by your staff. Those were completed last year and endorsed by council in 2018, May of 2018. And the intent there is to have those guidelines provide direction for what the built form is to look like in these areas that are going to be intensified. And I can tell you that our project has been designed in accordance with those council endorsed guidelines. Next, I'd just like to, actually I want to get to the PowerPoint if I can figure out how to do this. There we go. I'm going to go to this slide. Hopefully everybody can see it okay. This is to help you understand the location and what makes this location special for this type of development, and make it clear why this is one of the best sites in all of Milton for this type of intensification. It's located, as I think most of you are aware, at the southwest corner of Thompson and Drew Center. The property has an area of about 1.5 hectares, or just under 4 acres, which is again relatively unusual to find a site. So that provides the opportunity to do something special on the site and to create a landmark development, and that's what we're trying to do here. The town's urban growth center, there is an orange line that outlines it, which clearly encompasses this property. And actually the urban growth center goes as far west as Martin Street. And then the major transit station area is that circle that you see in yellow, which is at approximate 500-meter radius from the GO station. So clearly you can see that we are within both of those areas that are defined for intensification. The property is well separated from any of the low-density, low-rise residential neighborhoods. The nearest home on the north side of Childs, which is at the south side, the bottom part of that photo, is about 200 meters away from the southernmost proposed tower. And then the homes on the north side of Main Street are about 500 meters away from the site. So that separation helps greatly to minimize any potential impacts on these low-density established neighborhoods. The site also has the advantage of being very well served with a wide range of commercial uses. You have the Milton Common immediately on the north side of Drew Center, and then the Milton Mall about a 10-minute walk or so further to the west over by Ontario Street. So really, most commercial restaurant, those types of things that people would need on a day-to-day basis are within walking distance to the site. The town's main cultural centers are also walking distance to the site. So the Center for the Arts is within a couple of minute walk. The main library is right there as well. Additionally, the Milton Leisure Center is in the vicinity. The Milton Memorial Arena is there, and there's abundant parkland in the Lions Sports Park. So it's an incredibly well-served location with pretty much everything that people need to live on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's apparent that it's a unique site within Milton, and it's perfectly located to take advantage of all the existing infrastructure and amenities needed to support this type of planned intensification within your major transit station area. I'm going to go to the proposal next. If I can make this work. This is the next one. Thanks very much. So this is a conceptual rendering of the project. We've been working on this for considerable time, probably close to 2 years now, with your planning staff to get the project to this stage of development as a concept. So we did suffer some delays because the town did come up with some those tall building design guidelines that I mentioned. So we did have to go back a bit to the drawing board and revamp the project somewhat to meet the requirements of those guidelines. So that's what's reflected here. So it consists of 3 high-rise apartments on top of a podium. And the podium occupies most of the site. It's 4 stories in height, and then we have the apartments on top of that. So the apartment heights of 31, 29, and 27 stories do include that 4-story podium as well. So they're not on top of the 4 stories. I just wanted to clarify that. And the total unit count is estimated this time to be approximately 802 units, which would consist of a mix of 1-bedroom, 1-bedroom and den, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom units. Along, if I can get to the next, is it the yellow button? The next, okay, thank you. The next slide shows the podium frontage along Drew Center. So along that section of Drew Center, we're looking to have grade-related commercial uses along there. And the grade-related uses would essentially have a 2-story height to them, and above those would be 2 stories of residential suites. At grade, the zoning bylaw that's in the staff report that's been prepared by your staff, along at grade for the commercial uses, it includes uses such as retail, restaurants, offices, and a daycare center. And then the podium also goes on the left side of the podium. You can see it going down Thompson Road. So because there's a grade separation there and Thompson Road drops down, that would be just all residential units. The podium wraps, those uses wrap what is inside the podium, and inside is mainly parking, as well as some amenity space, indoor amenity space, and lockers for the units. We go to the next slide, please. Or actually, I can probably do it. So that's just a close-up showing you the podium and the commercial uses. And the next slide shows, this is the rooftop or the deck of the podium, which shows amenity space. So it'd be a mix of hard, soft surfaces up there. All the details of that would be worked out through the subsequent application needed to make this thing happen, which is the site plan application. The parking, as I mentioned, is entirely incorporated within the building, within a parking garage. There'd be 2 levels of underground parking and 3 levels of parking above grade within that podium. The parking is proposed to be provided at a rate of 1 parking space per unit, and then visitor parking at 0.25 spaces per unit. And to help reduce the demand for parking, the proposed zoning bylaw includes a requirement to implement what are called transit demand management measures, which is something that's becoming more common now, these types of developments. And those include things such as additional parking space, additional bike parking spaces, at least 1 car share, subsidized GO Transit Presto cards, and again, what's called unbundling of the parking spaces from the units so that the parking space can be bought separate from the unit. If somebody doesn't need a parking space and doesn't want to buy one, they don't have to buy one. So the key design elements that I've provided you a bit of an overview here, and there's a lot more detail, and that's been incorporated into the draft zoning bylaw. And it's expected that additional design details would get fleshed out during the site plan approval process. The bylaw has a holding condition in it. There's a number of conditions that we need to satisfy before being able to lift that holding provision. One of them is obtaining site plan approval prior to removal of that provision. So that would ensure that all the details are fleshed out to the satisfaction of your staff. One of the things I wasn't originally going to speak to, but I think I will, because you all have on your table a letter from the consultant for Loblaws speaking to their issues and concerns. We've been working with Loblaws for probably close to a year and a half now, and we're pretty close. It's been a very cordial, cooperative type of thing going back and forth. Their main issue is that on the north side of Drew Center is where their loading docks are, and their loading docks are open. So the noise studies that have been prepared say that no, we can't have those loading docks open and meet the noise requirements that are set out by the province. So your staff report has, again, a holding provision in there. And the staff report speaks to that, saying it's fine. That's part of what we have to deal with through the site plan process, and we have to meet what's called the Class 1 requirement under jargon, but NPC 300 is the provincial noise requirements. So we're doing that, and we've met with Loblaws. We've agreed in principle, we haven't papered it yet, but we agreed in principle to enclose those loading areas for them. We've agreed that their architect is to prepare preliminary design drawings to show how that's going to be done, and that Loblaws, one of Loblaws' contractors, is to provide us with a cost estimate for doing that enclosure, and that we then would post securities to make sure that happens, and we'd enter into with Loblaws what we're between ourselves calling an agreement to make sure that all of that happens. So that is all underway. The ball is in Loblaws' court. We've been meeting with them and pushing them. Quite frankly, they've had a big reorganization at their end, where there's been big changes in staff. So all this has been unduly delayed because of that. But we're pretty close to having that resolved. We don't see any issue with that being taken care of. It will. It's just a matter of time. But there's nothing that we can do about it until we get the information from Loblaws. So I've been trying to get it from them, and again, it's just taking longer than we hoped for. So I just wanted to speak to that because I thought that might come up either as a question or a comment. So that concludes my presentation. I'm sorry if I went over the 10, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
No, I believe you were just under the buzzer, so that's
good. Okay.
Yeah, just under the buzzer. I have speakers list starting here. We have Councillor Best and Councillor Chalmers. Councillor Best.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. Could you go back to the context map on your PowerPoint, your first one? Just have a couple of questions for you, and thanks for the innovations that I've seen some interesting proposals that I've never seen before.
How do I? Oh, okay, good.
Yeah,
I don't know how to go backwards on this thing.
Yeah. Just keep going. Okay. And the initial planning report that was submitted, the justification report, you mentioned not only their site here, but also that the owner also owned this property here. For to people that know this area, it's the former pigment and chemical plant. Has the owner or applicant made any decisions on that property? Because what I see you're doing here is setting the guidelines for any other development in that area.
No, actually, what's happening on that site is that Metrolinx, as you're aware, Metrolinx is looking to improve the Milton GO station. So there's quite a number of improvements, adding more parking, which seems, in my mind, contrary to the objective of putting more people in this area. But one of the other things is putting in a new big bus loop. So that bus loop would come west from where the station is now. If you can see where the GO symbol is, it would go parallel to the tracks going west, and then go up that property, my client's property, which is called 560 Main, and connect up with Wilson Drive. And then there'd be an intersection at Wilson Drive. So Metrolinx is looking to expropriate most of that property for the bus link. And there was actually, obviously my client's not too thrilled about that, because it's essentially going to, take away the entire property. So there was what's called a hearing of necessity last October on that request of Metrolinx, and the decision did come down before the end of the year that the request is valid and that Metrolinx is allowed to proceed with that expropriation. So we're just awaiting the delivery of the expropriation papers to make that happen, unfortunately, for my client, and I think somewhat for the town.
You know more than we do right now.
Yeah.
Second question regarding the area, basically what you're proposing here. Who is going to be the builder for this project, or have you decided on one yet?
There's still, my client is looking to partner up with a builder, but it's a little bit of a chicken egg. It's difficult to write up a partnership if you don't have the planning approvals in place to actually make the project happen. So there are discussions. I'm not at liberty to say with who yet, and it's not finalized yet.
I can understand it. And the third and last question, if you look at the, unfortunately, you've taken it off there, but on the context there, you only have one entrance for 802 units, and I'll be following this up with staff. Did you ever consider having a right-in, right-out into the underground parking from Thompson Road? Because if you look at this drawing, if you, unfortunately, it doesn't show the map here, you have all your traffic coming in one entrance and then back out. Was there any consideration for having an entrance here? Because my concern is not only you have all your traffic coming, all the traffic from the GO station is going to be coming in and out at the same time.
Yeah. Well, this, the traffic has been clearly one of the big issues on this proposal. And I think in the staff report, it itemizes all the numerous studies and peer reviews done by different other consultants, a town's consultant, a Loblaw's consultant. So it has been settled upon this one entrance will be able to work. And I know staff can speak to it more intelligently than I'm not a traffic engineer.
I'll be asking them later.
Thank you very much, Councillor Schellner, then Councillor Melville.
Thanks, Councillor. To the delegation, a couple of questions. There was a fair bit of discussion with the community about this proposal when it came before the community about 2 years ago. And I'm just kind of curious as to what kind of alterations were made to the proposal following the meetings with the public.
Yeah. I think in the staff report, Chris describes some of the changes that were made to the proposal. Can't remember what page it's on, but there were a number of, I'd say the essential components of the proposal stayed generally the same as what was originally presented, and there were refinements in the detail of the design. I think that'd be the way to describe it.
Yeah, I think specifically if you look at the comments that were made, they almost uniformly related to building height. Mm-hmm. So was the building height changed in any way?
No, the building height wasn't changed. It left the same, and it's been thoroughly analyzed and thoroughly assessed. The tall building design guidelines came into play. This has been tested against those guidelines. The guidelines, I can give you what the guidelines speak to is a 45-degree angular plane being used to determine the height. I have a, if we can use this thing, I have a, so there's a bit of a diagram that shows how the height was tested and assessed. So your tall building design guidelines speak to having what's called a 45-degree angular plane being established from the nearest low-density type of housing. So as I mentioned, the nearest house on the north side of Childs is almost 100 meters away. So if you apply that 45-degree angular plane, you can see it going up. The 27-story tower, which is the one that's closest to those residents on Childs, would be coming in at around 25 degrees, plus or minus. So one of the tests that was used for the height. And the shadowing is another test that's used for height. So there was shadow analyses done. The shadow analyses, you know, this site has the advantage of really not having a lot of low-density homes around it. So the shadows, again, because they're point towers, they're narrow, they're very, very slender. They're not like anything you've seen built in Milton to date. So these are, you know, very narrow types of towers that are becoming more and more prevalent pretty much everywhere in these types of high-density developments. And there's a good reason for it. It's because they look slender. They kind of disappear against the sky. They're not like these monolithic slabs like used to be built in the 70s and 80s. So the shadows, because they're narrow, the shadows track really quickly. So we've done the shadow analyses, and the shadow analysis shows that there's virtually no impact. And the shadow is traversing across commercial uses and kind of recreational uses.
Are you aware of any other buildings that are currently being sited, you know, at TTC stops or GO train station stops between Union Station and essentially this area? So
Like,
Burlington to the
I
south.
can't speak to this transit line because I don't do that personally. I don't do as much work on it, but along the lakeshore line, for example, going through Oakville and Burlington, I'm more familiar with that. So Oakville has zoning approvals in place for a high-density site that's actually further away from the GO station. It's about 500 meters from the GO station, about 350 meters to the nearest kind of access to the platform. That's approved for 26 meters in height, so that's in place. Burlington, I'm not sure how much you speak with your colleagues, but Burlington is going through their mobility hub studies, which are their jargon for what's happening around their GO stations. So what they're looking at, and we have clients that have lands in those areas, so I'm familiar with it. So what Burlington is looking at in those areas is 30 stories beside the GO station, and then kind of dropping down in height as you get closer to the established neighborhoods.
Today, there isn't anything. I did a bit of a literature read, City of Toronto, City of Hamilton, just looking at, what they're considering. And what they're talking about is scale, so the scale of the width of the road versus the height of the building. And essentially, what they're saying is buildings of a height that this is proposed to be typically require a 5 to 7 lane highway in front of them, or roadway in front of them. Typically something half that size, which would be Thompson Road, would be 12 to 15 stories, as opposed to 27 to 31. Do you have any comments on that?
I do, yeah. That is like a general rule of thumb or guideline. That's more in the instance, though, when you're doing city building or you're dealing with city blocks, where you're going to be developing the entire block. This site, as I think we're all aware, is really unique because on the one side of it, it has the CPR lines, right, that the GO station runs on. To the west of it, it has a stormwater management pond. To the north side of it, it has some commercial uses. On the east side of it, it has a huge park. So you're not going to, see everything immediately adjacent to it and close to it being developed with the same type of height or density. So that'd be my answer to that question.
This question, Mr. Chairman, are you aware of any review underway of Metrolinx and its long-term plan?
Sorry?
Are you aware of a review of Metrolinx as an organization and its long-term plan?
They're constantly
Its 2041 plan.
Yeah, their 2041 plan, I think it's spoken to in the staff report. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Now, Councillor Malbeuf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Most of my questions have been asked, but just a couple of quick questions. I said in a report, and you stated that these were mixed usage, which would mean between condos and apartments. Do you have any indication what the split is?
No, actually, sorry, just to clarify, maybe I wasn't clear. What I meant to say in the mixed use is that there'd be some commercial types of uses, along Drew, and then the rest of it would be residential. At this point, it's still too early to be able to tell you unequivocally, what's going to be for ownership and what's going to be for rental. I'm sorry, I can't tell you that yet. But the one thing I can tell you is the proposal is for quite a few smaller units that would be more affordable types of units.
Okay. Also, one of the major concerns has been the proposed height of these buildings. Does your client, or is there any flexibility in the height of these three towers? And basically, my question is, how low can you go and still be financially viable for this project?
Yeah. I guess my answer to that is that, we do have a staff report that's really supportive and has done a really thorough job of analyzing the height on this thing. We think it's a terrific project. We've been at it for a couple of years now, and we'd kind of like to get to the end of the game if we could, and we'd like to ideally be able to do that tonight with you. So I know that there is a little bit of flexibility, but without knowing what is in mind, I really can't give you a direct answer on that. If you have a suggestion or something, but I don't know.
I know the suggestion would be, but you won't accept it. But
Yeah.
that's why I'm trying to find a middle ground here.
Yeah.
Where can we go? I was looking around 25 stories. Can we go? What is 27 feasible rather than 31? That type of thing. But maybe, depending on how it goes tonight, that maybe staff, and if your client would be prepared to sit down with our staff and try to, be a little bit flexible in that area, I think that would go a long way. So.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Melba. Councillor Tester-Duskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I have a question with respect to the train. You've kind of already mentioned that there's been dialogue with them. I'm more concerned about safety, to be honest, with respect to a potential derailment. I mean, I know the trains come in quite slowly. They generally aren't going to be carrying hazardous materials. However, we've had some, Lake Megantic and some other accidents that kind of bring it to the forefront of concerns. And I do have a bit of a diagram in front of me, but I just want to know what kind of discussions you've had with CN, or if any, about mitigation measures for potential accidents.
For sure. No, it's a good question because, we are right beside the CPR line. So the railway companies have rules that you have to follow when you're going to do any kind of development beside them. So they have a requirement for a building setback of 30 meters or 100 feet, which we've respected here. And they have requirements for doing either what's called a crash berm, which is an earthen berm that gets built up on your side of the property line. So in case the train derails, it goes into that earthen berm. Or alternatively, what you can do is build a crash wall that's a reinforced concrete wall, and that's been done in places. So in this instance, what we're looking at doing, though, is doing the building setback and berm combination. So all of that, like CP has already looked at this and provided their comments on it, and then the details of that get dealt with through the next stage of planning, which is the site plan approval. So at that, there'd be drawings showing exactly how those measures are to be put in place and constructed.
Thank you. I do have another question, Mr. Chairman, if I may. With respect, since we're talking about the train, and sorry, I said CN, I meant to say CP.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
There's also a little bit on page 20 of the technical report about a potential pedestrian linkage.
Yes.
Now, it's saying there that it would be encouraged. How likely is it that there'll be some cooperation with CP or with the property owners to facilitate some kind of access? I like the idea of people being able to move around easily on foot.
So the plan calls for having a good connection along the tracks and then as well along Drew Center. So right now, Drew Center really doesn't have much. It's kind of got like an asphalt, I wouldn't even call it a sidewalk, an asphalt path. So all of that would be torn up and reconstructed and put in with a proper, wide kind of pedestrian sidewalk where there'd be potential maybe to have some, if there's a restaurant or cafe use, to have some tables out on it. So all of that is potential to happen. The other element, though, is beside us, to the west of us, the town owns a stormwater management pond. And that's one of the things that we've had some just preliminary discussions with town staff about, whether there be opportunity to have a walkway connection come down kind of along the east side of the storm pond, the west side of our property line, to connect through that area to the platform. So those again are just initial discussions that would have to be fleshed out in more detail through the site plan stage.
Great, thank you very much. And next we have Mayor Krantz.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I made reference earlier on to the letter that's on our desk this evening there. You referenced it as well. Have you seen it?
I have, yeah, and I've been in communications with the author of that letter, yes.
Mr. Chairman, the question is, were they suggesting that it be deferred? Your comments on that. Now, in the very last paragraph, if you're familiar with it, they suggest we would appreciate that our office continues to be provided with notice of any and all future considerations of these applications and/or decisions related thereto. So I want to get a feel from what you and your client are thinking about this letter, keeping in mind that we seen it 3/4 of an hour ago.
Yeah. Like, I understand what they're saying because they want to see a solution to, their concern, which was about having their loading areas enclosed. So we've been at this for considerable, as I mentioned, for a considerable amount of time with them. We're getting there. I can't force them to provide us information they promised to furnish us to finish this thing off. It's already accounted for. It's spoken to in the staff report, and it's already accounted for in the zoning bylaw that's been prepared, because the zoning bylaw says that there's going to be a holding provision put on the site. There's a number of things that need to be taken care of before that holding provision can be lifted. One of them is that we have to demonstrate to the town that we are satisfying the Ministry of the Environment's noise requirements. So that's what we're working towards. So I think, quite frankly, I think their interests have already been taken care of through the staff report and through the draft bylaw that is before you. I'm sure, planning staff can speak to that as well to let you know what their comfort level with this is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess that question might be just as appropriate to staff at the appropriate time as well in their comments in that regard. Thank you.
Anything further from questions of Mr. Korsiak from members of council? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight, and I hope the answers to the questions were helpful.
And I guess what we'll do is, as Mayor Krantz had mentioned, if anybody has any further questions of Mr. Lupus or staff, we'll deal with those now before we head into the comments. So Mayor Krantz, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I'm sure, Mr. Chairman, that they heard us, so I'd like a response as to what position this letter that we've seen less than an hour ago puts us in.
Commissioner Planning.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, as Mr. Korsiak mentioned, we do have the holding provision in place. Holding provisions are utilized when there is a technical solution to an issue. In this case, staff has reviewed the proposed mitigation measures. We're satisfied that there is a technical solution and the holding provision cannot be removed, so a bylaw would not be coming forward to council to remove that holding provision until such time as we had reviewed the technical solution and were satisfied that it met necessary MOEC guidelines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That certainly raises my comfort level in that regard, then. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Krantz. Any other questions of staff from members of council? We have Councillor Best.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just a few questions to the Planning Commissioner or Director. Just on page 5 of the report, it mentions the density there, and also page 7, about 1.52 people per unit, but you have over 328 units over 2 bedrooms. And almost 40%. Why is this average so low when I understand the region and their development charges are looking like 2.2 people per unit?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The 1.52 is based on the town's 2015 development charges background study. So that's based on the census data. That's why we use the 1.52. I understand the region has recently updated it through their 2017 study, but it isn't quite much higher than what the 1.52 is. That being said as well, 40% of the proposal are units that are 2 or 3 bedrooms, but 15% of those are over 800 square feet. So even though they are 2 bedrooms, they're relatively small in size. I just want to point that out.
I'll make some comments about that later. Mr. Corsell mentioned about the Milton GO station, which we don't have the information. When does staff expect the detailed site plan to be approved and construction to start? And also when council is going to be informed?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we do not have a defined timeline on the GO station improvements at this time. Staff is continuing to work with Metrolinx on the proposal and will report to Council as soon as we have any more detailed information.
Appreciate that. And on page 27 and 28, I noted earlier about the traffic concerns of only using one entrance. Is there any criteria on the number of entrances into a building or, multi-unit complex? Because when you only have one access, you end up with, traffic jams. And what my main concern is also for emergency vehicles getting in and out of the complex.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's generally preferred to avoid having more accesses than you need, as they create additional conflicts with pedestrians and cyclists. And it should be noted that within the transportation impact study, it was noted that the subject development will operate very well with the one access.
Okay, I'll have my own opinion about that. On page 40, the traffic comparison was to 50 to 60 Old Mill Road. And from what I can see, that's really not a fair comparison. That's a different style of building. Did staff or traffic consultants study 115 to 145 Hillcrest Avenue, Mississauga, which is a similar complex to 3 buildings right next to the Cooksville GO station, which may have similar traffic generation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it was determined that the site at Oakville was an appropriate site to conduct the trip generation studies at, due to it being a high-density residential development situated right adjacent to a GO station, and it has a more local perspective to it being within the same regional municipality as Milton.
Okay. And page 43, is it normal to have 5 revisions to a traffic study? It's when you look at on the page 44 as well, that most times I've seen is maybe 1 or 2 traffic studies. To see 5 is seems that someone's trying to force the issue.
Through you, Mr. Chair, on average, I would say we get about 3 revisions to a TIS, sometimes more, sometimes less, depends on the complexity of the subject site and many other issues.
Okay, and last question and conclusions. It mentions about the additional height and also the bonusing procedures, but I don't see any notice here or any information regarding any sections 37 negotiations or proposed community benefits. Was there any discussion at this level, or is that something that's going to be done at the site plan level?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the application is for an official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment for the specific heights of the building. It was not proposed to use Section 37 or bonusing requirements to support the additional height in any way. Certainly through the design of the development, we're looking at things like pedestrian connections and other factors that will provide some community benefit, but that has not, the use of Section 37 has not been a deciding factor in this application.
Thank you for the clarifications.
Further questions of staff? Councillor Shalmer.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I have 3. The retail capacity, Mr. Chairman, what is the retail capacity of that area to support that building? Based on any kind of retail studies that we've done, is it sufficient?
Through you, Mr. Chair, a retail market analysis wasn't provided as part of the proposal. The applicant is seeking 950 square meters of commercial GFA. In past dealing with market impact studies for the entire town, we're actually deficient in terms of gross floor area for there wasn't an issue raised with respect to the amount of commercial GFA being requested.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, sorry. Further to that, in addition, there is tremendous potential for additional retail development to occur within the overall urban growth center, and more specifically within the major transit station area. The existing zoning does allow retail uses, and we anticipate that as the community continues to grow, there will be more retail development in the area.
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of the ability of the existing grocery store to support the additional inhabitants. The second question was around public transit. What is the ability of public transit in its current form to support what is anticipated?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the town's public transit system continues to evolve in response to additional population, and we currently review on a regular basis the capacity of the system to accommodate development. Certainly, this form of development provides transit supportive densities and supports an expansion of the transit system, which is ideally what we are trying to achieve.
My last question relates to fire, and I read the response from the fire department, but I guess my question is more of a technical question. We saw a situation recently in Toronto where a large high-rise lost its power and its ability to, in fact, deal with a fire internally. So what is our ability to support a situation where there is no hydroelectricity, there is no sprinkler system, and you've got people at the top of the building who are having issues because of a fire?
That would be, I believe, Commissioner Scott, or is our chief here?
I was going to speak through you, Mr. Chair. They do have generator systems in high-rise developments that are tested typically once a month to ensure that there's appropriate backup power in the case of a blackout or something of that nature.
And my assumption is then that would drive the sprinkler system, and that would deal with any kind of occurrence at a high level.
Anything further, Councillor Schauer? Thank you. And Councillor Tesser-Durskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question about parking. I see on page 4 of the report that we have a proposed reduction of 200 spaces compared to what the current bylaw requires. Do we know what the impacts of reducing parking are? Does it result in people looking for spaces in alternate locations, or does it result in people having fewer cars? Is there any, I imagine there's anecdotal evidence, but I'm wondering if there's been any, there's any kind of quantitative studies on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So essentially, residents will be assigned parking spaces. They'll know going in how many parking spaces they get, and we're providing visitor parking as per the zoning bylaw. So we don't anticipate there being any parking issues at this site.
Thank you. I like the idea of unbundling the parking spots from the units, because I think when there's people who don't have vehicles, they can sell or even maybe rent spaces to people who need them. So I think that's a good way to kind of design the unit and parking. I also have a question, again, it's probably more anecdotal, the answer, than anything, but with respect to the demographic of people who buy these types of units, there was some discussion and concern about impact on local schools. I know the school board has said they don't have concerns. However, I've heard from residents saying they're worried about the school's ability to have capacity for students. Nobody likes to see students in portables. Do we know what kind of demographics, families, are we looking at retirees, young professionals? What types of people generally buy these types of units?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, staff have used the persons per unit from Stats Canada and Statistics Canada data to analyze generally the population profile for the building, and are satisfied with the numbers that'll come out. Anecdotally, we really don't have a lot of experience with this kind of building in Milton. We're just trying, through this development, trying to support the development of a complete community and provide a housing styles and types. So the short answer is we really don't have any anecdotal evidence in terms of Milton specifically.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And any further questions of staff or members of council? Seeing none, I will just read out the motion that was moved by Councillor Malbouf, seconded by Councillor Ali. Be it resolved that the Planning and Development Report PD 0219 outlining applications for amendments to the Town of Milton Official Plan and Zoning Bylaws 16/2014 as amended to facilitate the construction of 3 mixed-use apartment buildings be approved, and that staff be authorized to bring forward official plan amendment number 53, in accordance with the draft official plan amendment attached as Appendix 2 to Report PD 219 for council adoption, and that staff be authorized to bring forward an amending zoning bylaw in accordance with the draft bylaw attached as Appendix 3 to the report for council adoption, and that whereas the Planning Act limits the ability to apply for a minor variance for a 2-year period following approval of this bylaw, be it resolved that a privately initiated application for a minor variance may be made. Comments? Councillor Malbuff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This development will add to the traffic and congestion in Ward 2, where we already have some issues. It will change the landscape of that area for sure. And those are some of the concerns I have. But are those justification enough to reject this project? In my opinion, no. We as a community are severely lacking in affordable housing. This project will help in that area. This is the ideal location for a housing project that will achieve the density and the intensification levels we are being mandated by the province to achieve. It is ideally located next to the GO station and the Milton Transit Hub, located close to shopping as well as the sports complex, the arts center, and our main library. If not here, then where? So I have to look at that. I'm hoping the proponent will be a little bit flexible on the height. Hopefully our staff can negotiate that. But my biggest concern is if we were to reject this project, it will certainly end up being appealed in front of LPAT. Since our staff supports the project, we would have to use outside consultants and legal to defend our decision. It would end up costing Milton taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight this. And in my opinion, there's no logical reason to oppose the project. And that is how LPAT board would see it, and we would lose. And so not only would we cost Milton taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars, but we may also lose any concessions we would have negotiated with the developer. So based on those realities, I will be supporting the project with the hope that the developer will show some flexibility on the height. But again, this makes sense. Politically, I would probably be wiser to say no, but in the common sense and the best interest of Milton as a whole, I believe this project should move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Malbuff. Councillor Challoner.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I agree with pretty much what Rick has said, except that I have a serious problem with the building height, and I can't support a building of that height at this location. I mean, all I have to do is take a look at every GO train station between here and Union Station, every TTC stop. The model has already been prepared and it's being stamped here, and I have no problem with that. It does fit. But the issue I see is the height. I'm very concerned that there's been no movement on the height at all. And I think that, you know, that says to me that we're not listening to nearby residents who, by the way, are only concerned about the height. This was a major election issue for them, as Rick knows, and his worship knows. And I think that some movement should be made to accommodate that concern. It's a concern that I have. When I look at what has been built east of us, this is a little bit unprecedented, and it doesn't really fit within the scaling that I see other communities doing. Things are certainly changing because of the province's changed growth plans, and I acknowledge that. But we're still asking for an official plan amendment here. I mean, this is not part of our current policy. At the appropriate time, I certainly would move deferral back to staff and the developer to attempt to negotiate something that is more fitting with this community, more fitting with what our residents would like to see, and more fitting, quite frankly, with our financial capacity to support it, as well as our infrastructure capacity to support it, which are interrelated. But I agree with what Councillor Malbuff is saying. you don't want to end up before LPAT. Let's negotiate an agreement that works for everybody.
A little guidance from Mr. Clerk. Does a motion for deferral take precedent over this discussion, or do we go to the actual vote, and if that passes?
Well, if it's a motion to defer, Mr. Chairman, then I'm trying to think. I think that would probably take precedent, but we still have that motion on the floor right now that you read. If I would suggest probably a better motion might be to defer that first motion, and if Councillor wanted to make that second motion, we could deal with that.
Mr. Chairman, I want to let the rest of my fellow councillors have their say on the current motion. And as I indicated, if the current motion fails, what I don't want to see happen is that's the end of it. What I want to see is negotiation. I don't want to see it stop here this evening.
So we'll continue on with discussions here. We have a speakers list forming. Councillor Tesser-Durskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm sorry, I missed. Are we still commenting on the original motion? Or are we talking about the deferral at this point? The original motion?
Right.
Okay. Thank you. And I thank Councillor Challoner for his comments, and I understand where he's coming from. It's his ward. It's not my ward. However, I tend to agree more so with Councillor Malbouf. I think if there's any location where this type of development is suited, this is it. Right next to the GO station, where presumably we would have residents who are going to utilize that transit. There's so many amenities within walking distance. I understand the concern with respect to traffic, but I think at this point that's just a necessary evil of life in our growing town. It's something we're going to have to deal with and hopefully address through revisions with our own public transit and improvements to that. I think the demographic that this is going to serve is the important demographic of people who are in early retirement. We know that this is a demographic that's growing. I also think it's going to serve a demographic of younger professionals and families starting out who need affordable housing. And it's something that I feel we're severely lacking in this town, affordable housing. We have to come up with 53 residences within 12 years. Is that the correct statistic? 5,300 by 2021. So, I mean, we have to get moving on that in some way, shape, or form. I think this would be a big step toward completing the objective of that number. I do agree that if there is more room for negotiating with our developer partners on the height, that would, you know, logically, I don't think it necessarily is going to have a huge impact if we go from 25 to 31. Or sorry, from 31 to 25. I think more than anything, it's going to be a measure of comfort to the residents who have expressed concern over the height. It'll show that we've listened to their concerns and we understand where they're coming from. And if that's something that the developer could potentially negotiate with staff on, I think that would go a long, long way. That's the extent of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Now, Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chairman. I have heard all the discussions, and I just want to say I'm really happy to see this coming into Milton. It is something we do not have in Milton so far. It makes me happy to see a progressive-looking building coming into Milton that is going to cater to employment issues. It's going to provide us commercial opportunities, affordable housing, and building height. Why is building height an issue when the shadow studies are telling us it's okay? Staff reports are telling us it is okay. Is it because it will change the area? If that is a concern that we should be concerned about, I wouldn't be sitting here, because I come from the ward in Milton, which is a changed area. So I think that should not be our concern. And if this was an election issue, and if that is the reason we are, 50-50 about it or thinking about it, there were many other election issues that were brought forward by the same council who chose to vote against those issues. So having said that, I will support this, And I will also make sure that we keep a close eye on the traffic, and wind control measures are taken to make sure none of our residents go flying away or something like that. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Krantz, your comments.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And again, as mentioned on more than one occasion this evening, that Councillor Melboof, I think, kind of set the pace for some of the discussion, and I've heard that the biggest majority of us, including myself, support and endorse, for the most part, what he's suggesting there. So I certainly will be supportive of the original motion when we get to that. But I think, Mr. Chairman, we will be judged, believe it or not, on what we probably do here tonight. This is not the last of these types of development that's coming to Milton, so we've got to get used to it. It's coming, so it's just the start of it. So last thing that I want to see as well, Councillor Melboof alluded to it, as to the cost. And I can assure you, I've been that route before. Politically correctness drives me nuts. I've been on the losing side of that on more than one occasion. I want to get into it full well knowing that it may cost the taxpayer hundreds of thousands of dollars, and Councillor Melboof, I think, expressed it reasonably well there. And so with that, there's more to come. And, you know, if it was to go south, as I referred to it, we will lose, so will the taxpayers, and there will be no negotiation. It'll be set by the province. It'll be set by the courts, ALPAT or OMB or whatever you want to call them now. Mr. Chairman, and I think it really is, and I'm prepared to stand up and be counted, so I'm calling for a recorded vote on this as well, so thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Krantz, and I believe it was Councillor Best that was next.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the appropriate time, if this does go to a deferral vote, I would second Councillor Challoner's motion, because I have similar concerns to him as I've raised through my questions. I also have some pictures here if staff want to bring up the first one. I understand the concerns on both sides of this issue, but tonight we're making a precedent-setting decision. We're talking about an application here that is double. If you want to enlarge that picture, please, if you can. No, that's as far as you can go? Okay, that's better. Just on this issue, this is a view from Main and Scott Boulevard I took this morning, 3 kilometers away. You may not be able to see it too well in this picture, but that's the 12-story Jasper condo there, 6-story west side, the 15-story Village Park on the Pond, which is our current tallest building, and it only got the extra 3 floors because that was a negotiation. Because it was originally supposed to be 12 stories, as the mayor might remember. In 1988, they also wanted to take out a heritage house. The council at the time negotiated to add those 3 floors and preserve the house. We also have other buildings on Millside Drive. In my estimation, unfortunately, I couldn't get exact height. If you look at, this is a 12-story building here. The other building, this proposed building, will probably be at the bottom of the stoplight. As I highlighted to councillors when I originally came to council, if we go to the next second picture as you're coming up, the elevation above sea level of this area is 203 meters. The elevation of the escarpment is 280 meters. So this, based on my quick calculations, which I couldn't get from staff, you'll have a building that will look just about like this, which is 34 stories. It's known as the Fox Plaza. Some people might know it from another name, from a movie, but it has been dominating the landscape for 30 years in Los Angeles. When anyone looks at the perspective of these buildings, it's, you know, if you go back far enough, it all looks like one building. If when you're only close, and we go to the third picture, please. This is your typical situation at 6:45 at night. This was sent to me by a resident. This goes on for about 2 hours. The site is just up on the hill over here. This is going southbound on Thompson Road. I've been caught in these traffic jams as well. This goes on from about 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Although the traffic studies may show that there's no impact, it's certainly not going to help the situation. And one thing that I was looking for in a deferral is staff negotiate so council knows beforehand exactly what our position would be, because what I'm looking at is possibly right turn lanes at Main and Thompson, as well as on Thompson and Drew Circle, to get people in and out of there. Because I'm looking at these technical reports, Mr. Chairman, and there's 1,200 car parking lot, and it states 139 cars in the morning and about 160 in the evening. That's 17% of the population. I don't believe that will happen, and that's why I raised the issue of the Hillcrest Avenue in Mississauga. If staff could look at that building, because I've been in those buildings as well as on the Old Mill Road in Oakville, and they're not comparable buildings. Mississauga, right beside the GO station, it has 2 entrances, one right into the GO parking lot. You know, the applicants made some innovative ideas, but as compared to what the mayor said, this is already costing us money. The shortfall, according to our Treasury staff, is $540 a unit. This complex alone will cost the taxpayers of Milton $433,000 in infrastructure. And as regards to provincial policies, well, as Mayor has mentioned many times, that, you know, if you pay, you say you pay. Well, we're seeing a lot of saying from the province. We're not seeing a lot of paying. And until I see, 1, a Metrolinx plan, 2, some negotiations or some community benefits, and 3, an improved traffic pattern, I'm not voting for this.
Thank you, Councillor Best. I have Councillor De Lorenzo and then Councillor Hamid.
So I had a question because of what Councillor Chandler was saying about the defer. If this motion fails, my understanding through the chair is that we would go to another vote to either defer it. Is that the process, or
we'll go to the clerk?
If this motion did fail, then the appropriate motion would be to refer it back to staff for further discussion.
So my understanding is if it fails, the applicant can then appeal to LPAT, which is what we're expecting. If this motion fails and then we defer it, can a deferral also be an appeal to LPAT? It's sort of a question because it's going to affect how I vote on the
Commissioner.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if I may be of assistance, the application has been under review in excess of the timelines allowed by the Planning Act, so a non-decision or a deferral by council would afford the applicant an opportunity to refer the application to the LPAT right now.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Okay. And we've gone around the horn. Councillor Hamid.
Thanks. I won't mention things that have already been mentioned before, and I don't think I'll change anybody's mind, so I won't attempt to do that. I do want to respond to one concern. I'm one of the, when Councillor Best had a picture of traffic, I'm one of those cars because I've been taking the GO train for 4.5 years now, rush hour, obviously. And that's one of the reasons why I agonize over this, but I do want to point out that people who live practically at the GO station. So where I park my car is further away than this property. People who live at the GO station are not the ones driving. There's people like myself who live further away. And so we do have to decide whether we want density in Milton or not, but if we do, then the best location is next to the GO station. Because if we don't have it there, that means we're putting it further away where folks will have to drive to the GO station, adding to the traffic. People who are living at the GO station are not the ones driving. The other quick comment I do want to mention is that we do have, I mean, housing affordability has been mentioned. One issue I did hear during the election campaign, both from lifelong residents downsizing, retiring. My parents were in that boat as well. And young adults buying their first homes. There's nothing in Milton. They have no options and forced to move out. Members of my own family have been forced to move out. My parents were able to find a condo in Milton, and the condo they live eventually ended up moving in. I was in council when that application came in, and of applications around that area. Same concerns were mentioned, and none of those concerns materialized because it turns out that people who live in 600 or 700 square foot apartments don't own 3 cars. Problem are people like us, people like myself, honestly, single family home owners that have 2 to 3 cars. They're going out rush hours. I wouldn't have voted for this property if I didn't read somewhere in here 85% of condos are less than 800 square feet. These guys don't have two cars. They're really going to be retirees. They're going to be single adults. They're going to be people who are either buying the first homes or downsizing. Otherwise, there's literally no reason to live at the GO station. Not even next to the GO station. This is closer to the parking lot. Anyway, so just wanted to explain some of my reasoning after a lot of agony why I will be voting for this proposal. That said, though, I do share concerns about height, and I hope that something can be done about it. Thank you.
Seeing everybody, we have somebody, Councillor Tezaderski, for a second time.
Sorry, I'll be real quick. Basically, Councillor Hamid said everything I had in my notes with respect to the traffic. People who live there are not going to be traveling at rush hour away from their home, presumably. And with respect to what Councillor Best mentioned about the cost to taxpayers to go ahead with the development, I'm also concerned about the cost to taxpayers for defending at the LPAT, which, if I were the developer, that would be my next step if this got shot down here. So that either way, there's a cost to be incurred, there's a benefit to be had, and I think we have to weigh the difference. Thanks.
And Councillor Schauner.
A couple points. I'm not naive, I know where this is going. But I want to say, just for the record, the majority of people who live in apartment buildings along the GO line do not use the GO train today, according to what I read in the weekend. It's different for the TTC. So Councillor Best's comments about traffic is entirely legitimate at this point in time. Will it change? Sure. My final comment is with respect to affordable. The market will decide what's affordable. Unless this is a geared income property, it's what the market will decide.
Seeing all comments so far, nothing else further. Mr. Clerk, a recorded vote has been called for. So I've read the resolution, PD 00219. Any questions, comments, final? All those in favor, please stand and be recognized by the chair.
Mayor Krantz, Councillor Ali, Councillor Di Lorenzo, Malbouf, Councillor Tessa-Dirksen, Councillor Hamid, Acting Mayor Cluett.
All those opposed?
Councillor Best, Councillor Chalner. Your Worship, the motion carries 7-2.
And that's carried. Members of Council, thank you very much for that discussion and for the speed that actually went. As we find next thing we have on the agenda is a notice of motion. This is this one I think should go quick. This is a notice of motion by Mayor Krantz, seconded by Councillor Best. And it will require 2/3 majority. Be it resolved, whereas Procedure Bylaw 007/2019 provides that notices of motion shall not be discussed or debated upon introduction, but shall be included on the next regular council meeting agenda for consideration. And whereas Section 7.9.3 of the Town of Milton Procedure Bylaw 07/2019, as amended, permits a notice of motion be considered upon its introduction by the affirmative vote of 2/3 of the members present. And where it is deemed impractical or not in the best interest of the Town of Milton to delay consideration, therefore be it resolved that the pertinent rules contained in Section 7.9 of Procedure Bylaw 007/2019 be waived to permit the introduction and consideration by Council of the notice of motion on the Council agenda pertaining to the regional government review. Any questions to that? Again, requiring 2/3. All those in favor? And that's unanimous and carried. And now we move to the notice of motion, excuse me, that was moved by Mayor Krantz and seconded by Councillor Best. Should I read this out to begin with in full now? Okay, just make sure. This is going to be a long one. Be it resolved that whereas the Government of Ontario has announced a review of Ontario's 8 regional municipalities, Durham, Halton, Muskoka District, Niagara, Oxford County, Peel, Waterloo, York, Simcoe County, and the lower tier municipalities as by appointed special advisors, and whereas the provincially appointed advisory body will develop recommendations for the minister for the purpose of improving governance, decision-making, and service delivery in the regions and Simcoe County and their lower tier municipalities, and whereas the Association of Municipalities of Ontario informed its members that last August, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing began informal discussions wishing to hear from people on how the system of governance is working, recognizing it was established in the 1970s. And whereas the provincially appointed advisory body has included in the review consideration of moving to a single-tier municipality or amalgamating existing municipalities, and whereas neither the provincial review nor the amalgamation was ever discussed during the recent provincial election by the Premier or our local member of provincial parliament, and whereas in the 16 municipal elections since the 1974 creation of our two-tier system of municipal governments, no one has run or been elected to change the structure of municipal government in Milton, and whereas Halton Region is a model of municipal efficiency through service agreements between municipalities and the region, and a 98% of Halton residents rate their quality of life very high, and whereas the 2018 municipal study by BMA Management Consulting, Inc. indicates that residents in Milton currently enjoy the lowest municipal cost, tax rates, and wastewater rates as a percentage of household income in the province of Ontario. Therefore, be it resolved that the Council of the Town of Milton endorses the current effectiveness of our two-tier municipal government, and that through circulation of this motion, Council communicate to the province that the residents of the Town of Milton value the autonomy to build a unique community that aspires to be a place of possibility and should have their democratic say before any change in municipal representation or possible amalgamation with other municipalities. And further, that this resolution be forwarded to all the Halton municipalities, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. That was a mouthful. As the mover, Mayor Krantz, you have the floor.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, it's certainly self-explanatory, and again, I'm going to be calling for a recorded vote because I think it's important that we send a unanimous message, hopefully, to the province in this regard. So every other municipalities could be affected is going on record, including the region of Halton, because at least in my opinion, I think many others, that in Halton here, the 4 municipalities in the region is working quite effective. Thank you.
Councillor Best, as the seconder.
Yes, I completely agree with the mayor. I think the motion sums it up, and I've heard 3 times now from the Minister of Municipal Affairs that one size doesn't fit all. He didn't say what he was going to be sizing, but it's something Halton has probably the best record of any region, and I take comfort in that both the advisors have regional experience, one being a former regional chairman and the other one being the former CAO of Burlington. This is a concern, I know, with the other regions as well, and hoping a united face between all 4 municipalities and the region should pay some heed. And also that looking at the persuasion of most of the MPPs representing Halton, I don't think they want to get into this.
Thank you. Anybody else want to share comments? Councillor Schallner.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm supportive of it in principle. I don't think that frankly Halton is dense enough, developed enough to go to one-tier government, but at some point in time that may happen, but all of us may be long gone by that point. I'm a little bit concerned by some of the language in it, but I'll leave it. I mean, I think the reality is, is Halton serving Milton as well as it could? I would argue that it's not. There's things that are still not done that were supposed to be done when I left here in 2006, and one of them is Britannia Road. They have a lot of money sitting in their bank down south that should be invested back here, and it hasn't been yet. And so yes, I think the province needs to hear from us in terms of we don't believe Halton is ready for one-tier government yet. But on the other side, Mr. Chairman, I don't want this held against you or the mayor or Colin or Z as, well, you love us. What could possibly be wrong with this situation? I mean, read some of it. You know, I mean, they're not perfect. Are they better than the alternative? Well, we don't know what the alternative is, so we'll go with this one for now. But I think we all know that the region has a lot of work to do in terms of its relationship with this community, in terms of its support of our infrastructure needs, and in terms of its ability to listen. As for this being an autonomous community, the province, through its growth plan, is making Milton no different than every other community in Southern Ontario. It's cookie cutter, and we saw an example of that a couple of minutes ago. They should be working on their growth plan. Quite frankly, it needs to be shredded and start over again, because it's not working for Milton, and I can tell you it's not working for a lot of communities in Southern Ontario. But, Your Worship, I will support this, but don't let Gary think he's perfect, because he's not.
Anybody else with any comments there? I just wanted to add my support for this resolution as well. This is something that I know that has been discussed at the regional level since the rumbling started at the AMO conference last August, and I was very happy to see that the 4 area municipalities are all passing very similar, if not almost identical, motions. Oakville has already passed theirs, Burlington has passed theirs, I believe Halton Hills is either discussing it tonight, and it's anticipated for that same full support, and I'm sure around this table we'll have that. I concur with Councillor Schellner's concerns about the region, but as all families, sometimes we have our disagreements, and there's times where Halton pulls itself together, and we can see that in our CN intermodal action, where we have the 4 area municipalities supporting a Milton concern there. So again, no one's perfect, and we'll leave it at that. But there's a number of, I could suggest that everybody could look at Google at the Fraser Institute. There's a number of studies that they've done on amalgamation, and all the promises of lower taxes and better services have fallen far behind what their expectations were. So let's see where the review comes from, but like I said, I'm confident in Milton and in Halton's cooperation on this. So a recorded vote has been called for. Ladies and gentlemen, all those in favor of this notice of motion, please rise.
Mayor Krantz, Councillor Ali, Councillor Best, Councillor Chalner, Councillor Di Lorenzo, Councillor Malbouf, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, Councillor Hamid, Councillor Cluett. Your Worship, carries unanimously.
Excellent. And we're saving money. Here's your paperclip. And bylaws, the fun part of the evening. Moved by Councillor Ali and seconded by Councillor Best, be it resolved that the bylaws number 18, 2019, 19, 2019, 20, 2019, 21, 2019, 22, 2019, 23, 2019, and 24, 2019 be read, passed, and numbered, and that the mayor and the town clerk be authorized to sign the said bylaws, seal them with the seal of the corporation, and that they be engrossed in the bylaw book. Any questions? All those in favor? And that carries. Regional councillor update. Are we going alphabetically or by ward number? Either way, it's Councillor Best, if that's your show.
So just 2 quick items. Our next regional workshop is March 20th. We'll be dealing with development charges, one of my favorite issues. Also at AMO, that the board is now fulfilling the vacancies due to the municipal election, and we're looking forward to doing some more negotiations with the province under the MOU discussions.
We can be fair if anybody wants to add. Nabo. I just want to say that I had an opportunity to attend the Ontario Good Roads Association conference this past week. Lots of interesting discussions, and I'll be putting together a little package or some form of a report to circulate to members of council, because it was very interesting. Lots of discussion on asset management planning, something that we're dealing with here in this municipality and at the region. And as well, we did have a chance to speak with a number of cabinet ministers and parliamentary assistants of our current provincial government, to Chair Carr, myself, and Mayor Burton, to talk about two-way all-day service, as we always do, and negotiations are continuing, and as well as other infrastructure needs that Milton has. So again, I'll be including that all in the report for everybody, to let everybody know what happened there. Anybody else? Any new business? And I believe this is the last one. Moved by Councillor Lara Lee, seconded by Councillor Best. Be it resolved that Council convene into confidential session to discuss personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, and to receive advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. Any questions? Mayor Krantz.
Mr. Chairman, to adjourn in camera, so I'm going to suggest about a 3-minute break, and then we'll reconvene in the committee room. Thank you.
Absolutely. All those in favor of that motion? And that's carried.